Key conventions to include.
Use words well, so, and right generously. These shouldn't just be at the beginning of sentences. They naturally occur mid-sentence as people formulate their thoughts. Example, it's actually a pretty huge market, when you really look at it. 2. Interruptions and overlaps. Real conversations rarely feature clean handoffs. Speakers cut each other off, finish each other's sentences, or interject with quick agreements. Use dashes to indicate cutoffs. Example, host speaker. But if they are only controlling like 10%, expert speaker. Right, exactly. 10% of that specific segment. 3. Active listening back channeling. The listener shouldn't just be silent during a longer explanation. They need to drop in short affirmations. Example, yeah, oh wow, right, makes sense. 4. Colloquialisms and conversational phrasing. Use casual transitions and phrasing instead of academic ones. Instead of furthermore, we must consider, use, and the crazy thing is, or so get this.
People often start a thought, pause, and rephrase it. Example, they have this, it's basically a dual structure. 6. No ellipses. Never use a case. For pauses or trailing off, always use a hyphen or dash to signal a break or shift in thought. 6. No ellipses. Natural notes.
You step into an elevator in a high-rise, the doors slide shut, and for a few seconds, you're just sort of dangling in a metal box, hundreds of feet in the air.
Right. It's something we do every single day without really thinking about it.
Exactly. We completely trust our lives to that machine. And you probably look at the shiny button panel, you see a familiar global brand name, and you just assume that specific company built everything that's keeping you from plummeting down the shaft.
Yeah, which is a totally logical assumption.
But the crazy thing is the name on that panel. They very likely didn't build the actual structural parts keeping you alive. So today, we are doing a deep dive into the shadow supply chain of the vertical world.
It really is a fascinating blind spot, isn't it? I mean, we interact with the built environment based almost entirely on surface-level branding. But the underlying manufacturing ecosystem, like the companies actually bending the steel and wiring the safety mechanisms, is completely invisible to the average person who's just riding up to the 14th floor.
Which brings us right to the mission of this deep dive. We are peeling back that branded panel to look at the unseen engine of this industry. The company is called Aran Industries Limited, and they trade on the NSE under the ticker Aran.
Yeah, a highly specialized B2B manufacturer operating out of Surat, Gujarat.
And you will literally never see their logo on a consumer-facing product, but they are the ones supplying the core parts. The automatic doors, the structural cabins, the traction machines, to the companies whose names you actually do see.
So to unpack how this actually works, we're pulling from a pretty substantial stack of financial research, company filings, market analysis, and some recent investor presentations centered specifically around Aran Industries. We're tracing their operations and financial performance up through the most recent data heading into FY26.
And I know what you, the listener, might be thinking. Why should you dedicate time to understanding an under-the-radar parts manufacturer in Surat?
Well, because this isn't just a story about elevators.
Right.
If you really want to understand the reality of India's current infrastructure and urbanization boom, you can't just look at the mega developers. You have to look at the component level.
Absolutely.
Understanding a niche player like Aran provides a very clear lens into how macroeconomic themes like the explosion in real estate, the sudden tightening of national safety regulations, the whole push for domestic manufacturing, how all of that actually translates into factory orders on the ground.
It's basically a real-time case study in how a specialized company captures value in a sector that's being forced to formalize very quickly.
Exactly.
So we are going to map out the mechanics of this business from the factory floor all the way to the balance sheet. We'll explore the competitive battlefield they're fighting in, the financial realities of their current aggressive scale-up, and of course the very sharp risks of tying your entire business to the real estate cycle.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's start with the fundamental anatomy of the business. Like, what is Aran actually producing?
So the defining characteristic of Aran Industries is that they do not sell finished elevators.
Okay.
They are a pure OEM supplier. They sell exclusively to original equipment manufacturers and regional contractors.
Got it.
Those regional players are the ones who buy the components, assemble the final elevator, install it in the building, and handle all the ongoing maintenance contracts.
Right, and looking at their revenue mix, it's primarily split into two very distinct divisions. You have the elevator division, which is the engine, making up roughly 70 to 79% of their total revenue.
Yeah.
And then there's the steel polishing division, which brings in the remaining 21 to 31%.
The elevator division is where the heavy critical engineering happens. They're producing the cabins, and that spans a pretty wide range.
Like what kind of range?
Well, they build standard passenger cabins, high-end designer cabins for luxury real estate, heavy-duty freight cabins, and even specialized hospital cabins.
Oh, right, because hospital cabins would have entirely different load-bearing and dimensional requirements, right, to
Yeah.
accommodate medical equipment and stretchers and all that.
Exactly. And they're also manufacturing the automatic door systems.
Yeah.
That includes the swing doors, the telescopic sliding doors, the glass doors you see in modern commercial spaces.
Yeah.
Plus, they produce the traction machines, which are essentially the heavy motors that actually pull the elevator car up and down. They make the control panels, the door operators, basically the entire nervous system and skeletal structure of the unit.
And then we have the steel polishing division, which, I mean, on paper, sounds like an entirely different business.
It does seem weird at first glance.
Yeah, this division takes raw stainless steel and creates highly polished sheets, decorative press plates, embossed sheets. You typically see these materials used in architectural interiors, facade cladding, and, well, the interior lining of premium elevator cabins.
Right.
Wait, I need to understand the mechanics of this dual structure, because having a steel polishing segment attached to an elevator parts manufacturer feels a bit disconnected. Is this just some legacy business they never spun off?
Not at all. And the mechanism here is crucial to their competitive advantage. It's actually a deliberate strategy of backward integration.
Okay, how so?
Think about the raw material required to build a premium elevator cabin. It is overwhelmingly high-grade stainless steel. So by operating their own steel polishing and processing division, Aran essentially acts as its own supplier.
Oh, I see. So instead of buying pre-polished, embossed steel from a third party at some premium markup to build their cabins, they just buy the raw, unfinished steel and process it in-house.
Yes, exactly. They strip out the middleman's margin on their most important raw material. This significantly reduces the input costs for their core elevator division.
That makes a lot of sense.
And furthermore, they sell the excess capacity of that polished steel to external architectural clients, which generates that 21 to 31% of external revenue we mentioned. It secures their supply chain, gives them absolute control over the aesthetic quality of their cabins, and lowers their blended cost of goods sold.
That's a really smart setup. I should mention the sources also note a very minor trading component where they contract manufacture electrical products, and they are kind of dabbling in automobile parking solutions like hydraulic car lifts.
Yeah, but the data makes it clear those are totally negligible right now. The true identity of this company is elevators and steel.
Right. So let's talk about who is actually buying these components.
Their customer base is heavily concentrated in the Tier 2 regional OEM market across India. Historically, their geographic stronghold has been South Gujarat, given that their 3 manufacturing plants are clustered in Surat.
Right, in Surat.
But they have been actively expanding their dispatch footprint pan-India.
I am trying to visualize this whole ecosystem. It sounds like Aran is building the high-performance engine, the transmission, and the luxury leather seats for a car. But instead of building the whole car, they ship those critical parts to hundreds of independent regional mechanics around the country.
That's a great way to put it.
And those local mechanics put the pieces together, navigate the local vehicle registration laws, and then just slap their own regional logo on the hood.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. Aran provides the precision-engineered, capital-intensive core. The regional OEM provides the localized sales network, the installation labor, and the hyper-local compliance work.
But hold on, if the doors and the cabins and the motors are the most valuable parts of the system,
Yeah.
why would an OEM outsource that? Aren't these regional installers just handing over all their profit margin to Aran? Why not just bend the steel themselves?
Well, it comes down to the physical mechanics of modern manufacturing and their really strict barriers to safety certification. To manufacture a perfectly aligned automatic telescopic elevator door that will open and close millions of times without jamming, you need serious machinery. You cannot do it with a blowtorch and a manual press in a garage.
Right,
You
obviously.
need automated CNC machinery and advanced fabrication lines.
And those machines require serious capex.
Heavy capex. For a regional OEM in Tier 2 India who might only be installing, say, 100 or 200 elevators a year, laying out the capital to build a state-of-the-art automated fabrication plant simply ruins their return on capital. The volume just doesn't justify the investment.
So the math basically forces them to buy rather than build.
The math and the regulators. You have to remember, elevators are high-liability infrastructure. Every component must pass rigorous safety certifications. An OEM buys from Aran because Aran has the centralized volume to justify the investment in the precision technology that guarantees those safety certifications.
Right, it frees the regional OEM from the burden of heavy manufacturing.
Exactly, allowing them to focus entirely on their core business, which is winning local real estate contracts and servicing the maintenance agreements.
Which sets us up perfectly to look at the macro picture. If Aran is the trusted, certified parts supplier for this fragmented network of local installers, we need to understand the sheer volume of elevators being built. What does the demand curve actually look like in India right now?
The total addressable market, the TAM, is pretty substantial. The Indian elevator market is currently valued between 12,500 and 15,000 crores as of 2024.
Wow, okay.
And the trajectory is steep. Industry projections expect the market to reach 25,000 to 29,000 crores by 2030, which represents a 10 to 12% CAGR.
Let's break down where that 15,000 crore figure comes from, because the sources provide the underlying calculation. The market is supported by two distinct pillars of demand: new installations and replacement cycles.
Right.
On the new installation side, India is currently putting in roughly 150,000 to 180,000 new units every single year. The blended average price across residential and commercial units sits at about 6 to 8 lakhs per elevator.
Then you have the secondary pillar, which I think is often overlooked, and that's replacement demand.
Oh, true.
India currently has an installed base of over 1 million elevator units. The physical reality of these machines is that they wear out. The industry standard dictates that 15 to 20% of that installed base requires a full replacement every 5 to 7 years.
And the replacement cost averages around 4 to 6 lakhs per unit, which is slightly cheaper than a new install because the structural shaft and the guide rails are usually already in place, right? They're just replacing the aging mechanical guts in the cabin.
Exactly. When you aggregate the spend on those 150,000 new units and the recurring replacement units, you arrive at that 15,000 crore TAM.
But for Aran Industries, we have to narrow that down, right? Because they aren't capturing the installation fee or the maintenance contracts. The ancillary parts they manufacture, the doors, the cabins, the machines, account for about 20 to 25% of the total cost of a finished lift.
Correct.
So their specific hunting ground is a healthy 20 to 25% slice of that broader market.
What makes this market fascinating is not just its sheer size, but its current structural composition. It is wildly fragmented right now.
How fragmented?
Well, the organized list of players, the names everyone knows, only control about 15 to 20% of the market.
Yeah.
High-end, complete system imports account for another 10 to 15%.
Okay.
That leaves an astonishing 45 to 50% of the entire Indian elevator market in the hands of unorganized, local, unlisted suppliers.
Half the market is essentially mom-and-pop fabrication shops.
Pretty much.
But the research points out that this 45 to 50% unorganized share is under severe existential pressure right now. The structural growth drivers are completely reshaping who is actually allowed to participate in this industry.
The overarching macro drivers are clear enough. You have urbanization bringing 8 to 10 million new residents into urban centers annually, which forces developers to build vertically. You have an 11 lakh crore national infrastructure plan. And you have an aggressive residential boom targeting 20 million new homes by 2028.
Which creates a baseline volume.
Right. But the true catalyst disrupting that unorganized 50% is regulation.
Yeah, the sources highlight this specifically. The Bureau of Indian Standards, the BIS, implemented strict IS 14800 safety guidelines, which have been heavily enforced since 2022.
And this changes the entire physics of the industry. Go back a decade or two. A local fabricator could weld some steel grating together, attach a basic motor, install a collapsible manual gate, and put it in a 4-story residential building.
Right.
It was cheap, it was functional, and it was entirely unorganized. But under the new IS 14800 guidelines, that is no longer legally viable. You need automatic doors with specific sensor arrays. You need standardized structural tolerances.
Let's trace the mechanics of that regulatory squeeze. Imagine you are one of the 200-plus unorganized small fabrication shops operating in a market like Tamil Nadu or Gujarat. The new BIS standards drop. Suddenly, local building inspectors require IS 14800 certification before they will sign off on a new apartment block. What actually happens to that small fabricator?
They hit a wall. To get the certification, they have to manufacture parts to a microscopic tolerance. And to achieve that tolerance, they would need to spend crores on automated machinery they simply do not have. So they face a binary choice: shut down the business entirely or pivot their model.
And pivoting means abandoning the actual manufacturing process.
Yes. They transition into being pure assembly, installation, and maintenance contractors. They still have the local relationships with the mid-tier housing developers, but to fulfill the contract, they now have to buy certified, pre-manufactured components.
So the regulatory environment is functioning as a massive, well, a huge involuntary sales funnel. It's taking the customer base of the unorganized sector and forcefully pushing them toward organized, certified component manufacturers like Aran Industries.
Exactly.
If the local guy wants to stay in business, he has to become an Aran customer.
It is a forced consolidation of the supply chain. And this domestic regulatory shift is happening alongside the broader Make in India initiative. The government is utilizing PLI schemes for electronics and applying a 20% import duty on elevator components.
Which simultaneously pressures the 10 to 15% of the market reliant on imports.
Right, creating a powerful dual tailwind for domestic organized manufacturers.
I want to highlight something in the market data that really changes how you view this industry. Obviously, construction is a heavily cyclical sector, but that replacement demand we talked about earlier, it creates this incredible non-cyclical floor.
It really does.
If interest rates spike and developers freeze all new residential construction for 18 months, the industry doesn't just go to zero.
The replacement cycle provides the buffer. A 15-year-old elevator carrying patients in a busy hospital or shuttling employees in a high-traffic commercial tower cannot simply be ignored because the macroeconomy is sluggish.
Right, it's a critical safety failure if it breaks.
It has to be replaced. And we saw this play out during the 2019 to 2020 economic slowdown. New elevator installations in India dropped significantly, but the replacement demand held firm, providing baseline recurring revenue for the component suppliers.
So we have a rapidly expanding TAM, we have forced consolidation pushing buyers toward organized players, and we have a non-cyclical replacement floor. It sounds like an ideal environment, but Aran is not operating in a vacuum.
Definitely not.
We need to map out the battlefield. Who else is at the table, and how does Aran actually defend its margins?
Well, Aran does have a unique structural advantage in visibility. They are the first and only public limited company in India's elevator sector listed on the NSE SME platform.
Which might sound like just a corporate technicality.
Yeah, but being listed provides a level of financial transparency, corporate governance, and access to capital that their unlisted regional competitors simply cannot match. It builds immediate trust with larger OEMs.
But they're still a relatively small player in the grand scheme. We're talking about less than a 1% share of the total market. And the sources point out they are operating in an industry with colossal global players. KON, ThyssenKrupp, Hitachi.
Sure, but we have to define the actual arena they compete in. Aran is not walking into a boardroom trying to outbid KON for the elevator contract on a new 60-story luxury hotel in Mumbai.
Right.
Those global giants are fully integrated system providers. They control their own supply chains from the steel to the software. Aran's battlefield is strictly the Tier 2 OEM space.
Okay.
Their direct competition consists of large domestic OEMs like Godrej, large unlisted regional manufacturers, and highly aggressive Chinese import suppliers.
Let's get into the mechanics of how Aran actually wins a contract against a large regional manufacturer. The research leans heavily on their technology and process advantage, specifically calling out their use of Salvagnini automated fabrication lines and advanced CNC machinery.
Yes, the Salvagnini lines.
What does that actually mean on the factory floor?
To understand the advantage, you have to understand the machine. A Salvagnini line is a state-of-the-art, fully automated sheet metal processing system.
Okay.
In a traditional shop, a worker has to manually load a sheet of steel, physically align it in a press brake, bend it, move it to a punch press, and weld the seams. It is slow, labor-intensive, and highly prone to millimeter deviations.
And a millimeter deviation on an automatic sliding door means the door eventually jams on the tracks?
Precisely. The Salvagnini machine takes a flat sheet of metal and automatically punches, shears, and bends it into a complex, perfectly uniform elevator door panel in a matter of minutes with zero human intervention. The precision is absolute.
So they use heavy capital investment to remove human error from the equation, which allows them to guarantee the tolerances required for safety certification at a volume the regional guys just can't match.
It also grants them tremendous flexibility. Because the machine is software-driven, Aran can switch from manufacturing a standard residential door panel to a custom dimension hospital cabin panel almost instantly, without needing to manually retool the entire factory floor.
There's another specific moat mentioned in the filings regarding the materials. Aran is apparently the sole supplier of embossed stainless steel sheets in India, trailing only Jindal Precision.
This ties back to their steel polishing division.
Oh, right.
When an architect or a premium developer wants a specific textured aesthetic for an elevator cabin, say a scratch-resistant patterned steel finish, they need embossed sheets. By being one of the only domestic manufacturers with the machinery to produce this at scale, Aran captures the high-margin premium cabin segment where unorganized fabricators simply cannot compete.
Okay, the technology sounds great, the premium sheets sound great, but let's deal with the reality of Tier 2 Indian manufacturing.
Let's do it.
The sources are very clear. Chinese imported components are routinely 20 to 40% cheaper. We know Tier 2 buyers are ruthlessly price sensitive. If I'm an OEM in Gujarat and I can buy a container of doors from Wenzhou for 30% less than I can buy them from Aran, why doesn't Aran just get priced out of the market entirely?
It's the most critical question for any domestic manufacturer. The defense against cheap imports really comes down to three intersecting factors: backward integration, logistics, and switching costs.
Okay, break that down.
Start with the cost structure. Aran isn't trying to beat Chinese manufacturers on the sheer commodity price of raw steel. They are utilizing that steel polishing division we discussed. By processing the raw steel internally, their blended cost of goods sold is fundamentally lower than a domestic competitor buying finished steel.
So their internal efficiencies narrow that 30% price gap right out of the gate. And then there's the 20% import duty levied by the government, which shrinks the gap even further.
Exactly. But the real deciding factor is logistics and delivery reliability. The Tier 2 OEM business model relies entirely on just-in-time delivery. They do not have massive warehouses to store elevator components. If a mid-sized developer is building a 10-story apartment block in Ahmedabad, the elevator shaft is built on a specific schedule. When the shaft is ready, the OEM needs the cabin and doors delivered that Tuesday.
If the OEM orders from China, they're dealing with a 4 to 6 week lead time, ocean freight volatility, port customs, container shortages. If that ship is delayed by a week, the entire construction project stalls, the developer is furious, and the OEM loses money.
Whereas Aran has 3 manufacturing plants sitting right there in Surat, they can guarantee that Tuesday delivery. When you factor in the narrowed price gap, the import duties, the absolute certainty of regulatory certification, and the guarantee of localized delivery, the total value proposition for the OEM shifts away from the cheap import.
And once that OEM makes the shift, the switching costs lock them in. Elevators are safety critical. Once an OEM qualifies Aran's specific automatic door mechanism, integrates it into their proprietary assembly process, and passes the local safety inspections with that exact configuration, they do not want to change suppliers.
No, the regulatory headache of requalifying a slightly cheaper Chinese motor next year simply isn't worth the fractional cost savings.
The qualification cycle in safety-critical engineering is a formidable invisible moat.
It really is.
The structural moats make sense, but we need to look at how efficiently this engine actually converts raw steel into capital. Let's dig into the financial realities and the people running the show.
Sure. Looking at their FY25 performance, Aran Industries reported total revenue of 77.93 crores, generating a net profit of 8.24 crores.
Let's map that back to the actual products. The unit economics are pretty straightforward. They bill the OEMs on a per-piece or per-kit basis. A standard automatic door system sells for roughly 25,000 to 35,000 rupees. A full cabin kit, the entire box, runs between 1.5 lakhs and 2.5 lakhs, depending on the finish and specifications.
And their margin structure across those units is highly defined. Gross margins are structurally capped around 25 to 27%.
Why capped?
This ceiling is dictated by the constant volatility in raw stainless steel prices and the aggressive competitive pricing in the basic door segment. However, their operational efficiency shines through further down the income statement. Their EBITDA margins have historically been exceptionally stable, operating in the 18 to 21% range.
Maintaining near 20% EBITDA margins in heavy cyclical manufacturing is impressive, and it results in very strong return profiles. The sources report a ROCE of around 19.31% and an ROE around 20.09%. What really stands out to me is that they're achieving these returns without relying on heavy leverage. They are effectively debt-free or net cash positive.
They run a remarkably conservative balance sheet, which is rare for a capital-intensive manufacturer. Their return metrics are generally superior to several larger engineering peers, driven by efficient asset turnover. However, the business does demand significant working capital.
Right. The research highlights a heavy inventory burden. They hold 60 to 70 days of SS304 stainless steel inventory.
Yeah.
This is primarily because they're still dependent on China for the raw steel supply, so they have to hold a buffer against supply chain shocks. When you blend that inventory with their receivables, their cash conversion cycle stretches out to 74.87 days.
Having cash locked up in 2 months of steel inventory is a burden, but the critical distinction is how they finance it.
Oh, how so?
Aran funds this working capital cycle almost entirely through internal accruals. They aren't constantly rolling over short-term bank debt to buy steel, which heavily insulates their balance sheet from interest rate spikes.
That philosophy of financial conservatism leads us right to the ownership structure. Aran is deeply family-controlled. The promoters are the Doshi family, led by Marchanu Hidoshi as managing director, and his son Manish Doshi. Together, the promoter group holds 73.06% of the equity. And the most telling detail, 0 pledged shares.
Yes, they are highly aligned. The family's wealth is entirely bound to the long-term equity value of the firm. You can see this reflected in their capital allocation strategy. They favor organic reinvestment into their own factory floors rather than pursuing aggressive, debt-fueled acquisitions to artificially inflate the top line.
We are also seeing indicators that they realize the limits of a purely family-run operation. They recently hired Paresh Naik as president.
That was a significant move.
He brings over 35 years of hardcore corporate experience, including a tenure at Reliance Industries. The explicit goal of bringing him on is to professionalize their sales infrastructure and expand their dealer network.
It's a classic inflection point for an SME. When a regional, family-run manufacturer with a strong engineering base brings in a seasoned corporate executive specifically to scale distribution, it's a definitive signal that they are preparing to move out of their regional comfort zone and aggressively target national market share.
That aggressive expansion plan sounds great, but I found a serious friction point in the Q2 FY26 earnings data that we definitely need to address. We've been talking about stable margins and a pristine balance sheet, but in the first half of FY26, their net profit took a 33.6% hit year over year.
Right.
The PUT margin dropped from nearly 10% down to 6.25%. If the core manufacturing engine is so efficient, why is profitability suddenly collapsing? Are they losing control of their costs?
If you just look at the bottom line, it appears alarming. But we have to trace that drop back up the income statement to see the mechanism.
Okay.
At the operational level, the business did not deteriorate. In fact, their EBITDA margins remained rock solid at 18.53% and actually expanded toward 21% in Q3. The factory floor is still highly profitable.
So if it's not the cost of making the doors, where is the cash bleeding out?
The compression in PTA is the direct mathematical result of their recent aggressive capacity expansion. Aran just commissioned a huge new manufacturing facility. When you purchase and install expensive new equipment like additional Salvagnini lines, 2 things happen on your income statement immediately. First, your depreciation expense spikes. Second, if you took on any term debt to finance that specific capex, your interest expense rises. Finally, they faced higher tax outflows during this specific period.
It's a timing mismatch. The cost of the new factory hit the income statement on day one, but the revenue generated by that new factory takes months or years to materialize as they slowly ramp up production and find buyers for the new capacity.
Exactly.
It's not an operational failure, it's just the financial friction of scaling up.
Right. It's a necessary transition phase. However, that sharp drop in PAC is a very real reminder to the market that scaling a heavy manufacturing business is dangerous. Expanding capacity introduces severe new pressures.
Which brings us to the actual vulnerabilities of this model. Despite the clean balance sheet, there are sharp edges here that could cause serious damage if the environment shifts. Let's lay out those friction points. What can actually break Aran Industries?
The most glaring vulnerability has to be cyclicality. The sources note that 64% of their total revenue is derived directly from the elevator segment, which is inextricably linked to the broader real estate and infrastructure cycle. They are entirely reliant on the health of the construction sector.
They're essentially a second derivative play on housing demand.
Yes.
To understand the risk, we have to walk through the cascading sequence of a real estate slowdown. It all starts at the consumer level. Let's assume mortgage rates rise and consumer demand for new apartments cools down in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities.
Right. When buyers vanish, the developers are left holding inventory. To protect their cash flow, developers immediately pause the launch of new building phases. That pause instantly hits the Tier 2 OEMs, who suddenly see their pipeline of new elevator installation contracts dry up.
which brings the pain directly to Aaron's factory floor. The OEMs stop ordering cabins and automatic doors. Aaron's production volume drops. Management has built this enormous new facility with the goal of hitting 85% utilization. If orders stall, that utilization rate plummets maybe down to 50 or 60%.
And here is the brutal reality of heavy manufacturing. At 60% utilization, Aaron still has to pay the fixed costs. The depreciation on the Salvagnini machines doesn't stop. The administrative overhead remains. Now, those high fixed costs are being spread over a much smaller number of units produced.
The margins compress rapidly.
Furthermore, in a low-demand environment, every component supplier is desperate for volume to keep their factories running. Pricing competition becomes vicious. Aaron might be forced to slash their prices and sacrifice their gross margins just to win enough orders to cover their fixed costs. A highly profitable operation can bleed into negative territory very quickly in that scenario.
And we actually saw a micro version of this vulnerability play out in the first half of FY26. It wasn't a macro recession, just an unusually prolonged monsoon season. The heavy rains physically delayed construction projects across their primary markets in Gujarat and Maharashtra. That simple weather delay disrupted the OEM's installation timelines, pushed back orders, and directly contributed to that drop in profitability we discussed. If a long monsoon can dent a quarter, a structural real estate recession would be devastating.
The second major risk vector operates independently of the real estate cycle, and that is input cost volatility. Specifically, their exposure to raw steel prices. Between 60 and 70% of Aaron's revenue is immediately spent on raw materials, primarily stainless steel.
And the research indicates their pricing power is surprisingly limited. They only have partial pass-through capability, estimated around 50 to 70%.
The mechanics of their contracts limit their flexibility.
It's kind of like a commercial bakery that signs a binding 6-month contract to supply bread to a grocery chain at a fixed price.
Good analogy, yeah.
But the bakery has to buy flour on the open commodity market where the price changes every day. If a global wheat shortage causes the price of flour to spike 20% overnight, the bakery cannot call the grocery chain and demand a 20% price hike tomorrow. They're bound by the contract. They simply have to absorb the loss on every loaf of bread until the contract expires and can be renegotiated.
That is exactly the dynamic Aaron faces with hot-rolled coil and stainless steel prices. If global supply chains restrict steel output and prices spike, Aaron experiences immediate margin compression. Yes, their backward integration into the polishing division provides a localized buffer, but it cannot fully insulate them from macro commodity inflation.
And the third major risk factor compounds the dangers of the first two. We are looking at a nano-cap company. Their market capitalization fluctuates around 240 crores. Because their entire model relies on supplying Tier 2 OEMs, the customer concentration risk is very real. The bargaining power rests heavily with the buyers.
They rely on a core group of perhaps 10 to 15 key regional OEMs and large developers. If a single top-tier client decides to switch suppliers, perhaps lured by an aggressive pricing discount from a domestic competitor like Godrej, or a sudden drop in Chinese import tariffs, Aaron could lose 10 to 20% of its top-line revenue overnight.
Wow.
For a company valued on its aggressive growth trajectory, a revenue shock of that magnitude would be disastrous.
The broader market is acutely aware of these friction points: the real estate cyclicality, the commodity exposure, the concentrated client base. That is why the entire narrative surrounding Aaron right now is focused on a single question. Can they outrun these vulnerabilities by executing their scale-up?
Which brings us to the horizon. Where is this company actually going?
Right. Aaron is currently sitting at a profound inflection point. They are attempting to transition from a highly successful, localized regional player into a scaled, automated, national manufacturing force. Let's lay out the primary growth vectors driving this transition.
The core engine is their aggressive capacity expansion. They are aiming to push their production capacity to 3,500 automatic doors per month by FY27. Simultaneously, they are aggressively pushing their new lines of premium designer cabin variants, which command significantly higher margins than standard units.
But the challenge lies in filling that capacity. Currently, the utilization at their newly commissioned facility is sitting around 40%. Management has been transparent, guiding that it will likely take 3 to 4 years for this specific new facility to hit its break-even point.
That 40% utilization figure is the absolute epicenter of the bull versus bear debate currently raging around the stock.
Let's examine the bull case first.
The optimists believe Aaron's technology moat will allow them to fill that factory. They project that Aran will successfully ramp up utilization to over 85% in the next 12 to 18 months. The belief is that the Salvagnini lines give them the precision required to start taking on major volume orders, essentially acting as a contract manufacturer for the giant lift makers like Johnson or OTS, who might want to outsource parts of their own supply chain.
And if they secure those volume contracts, the math works beautifully. The fixed costs of the new factory are fully absorbed. Revenue scales rapidly toward management's target of 140 to 160 crores by FY27.
Right.
Operating leverage kicks in, pushing margins well past 20% and generating significant net profit growth.
Conversely, the bear case hinges on the friction points we explored. The bears argue that the heavy capex costs will act as a prolonged anchor on cash flows. If the real estate market cools, or if those Tier 1 clients demand punishing pricing concessions in exchange for volume, utilization might stall out below 70%.
If utilization stalls and steel prices happen to spike simultaneously, the margins get crushed down to 16 or 17%. Because the stock currently trades at a multiple that assumes rapid growth, any failure to hit those utilization targets would cause the valuation to collapse rapidly.
Beyond the factory floor, the other major growth vector is geographic expansion. Domestically, they are systematically pushing out of South Gujarat, building dealer networks to target Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities across the broader Indian landscape, aligning directly with the national infrastructure push.
But the sources also highlight an aggressive international play. They have established a foothold in Kenya, and they are actively exploring ventures in Nepal and Tanzania.
Yeah, East Africa is a big focus.
I have to push back on this strategy, though. Why would a 77-crore company in Surat distract itself by trying to navigate the complexities of East African trade? There is a projected 29,000-crore market sitting right in their own backyard in India. Isn't this international venture a massive distraction from their core competency?
On the surface, it seems counterintuitive. But when you look at the mechanics of global trade, it is a highly calculated strategic move. First, consider the logistics. Shipping heavy steel components from the port infrastructure in Gujarat, like Hazira or Mundra, across the Arabian Sea to Mombasa, Kenya, is often logistically smoother and sometimes even cheaper than navigating the fragmented domestic trucking routes across the entirety of India to reach a market like Guwahati.
Oh, wow. Okay, the maritime logistics advantage makes sense given their location in Surat.
Second, the macroeconomic profiles align perfectly. The customer base in emerging East African markets heavily overlaps with Aran's core domestic demographic. You have rapidly urbanizing populations, a surging need for mid-tier residential and commercial infrastructure, and a strong sensitivity to the price-to-value ratio.
And I imagine the regulatory barriers are different as well.
Precisely. The safety certification barriers for Indian-engineered structural components are generally much more accessible in these developing South Asian and African markets compared to attempting to export into the highly rigid, legacy-dominated regulatory frameworks of Western Europe or North America.
Makes sense.
It represents a highly viable avenue to secure the incremental volume needed to feed that new factory.
It all comes back to the machines. The premium cabins, the pan-India dealer network, the export push to Kenya, the hiring of corporate veterans like Paresh Naik. Every single strategic move is engineered for one purpose: to secure enough order volume to feed the Salvagnini lines and achieve the operating leverage they've basically bet the company's balance sheet on.
It is a phenomenal high-wire act. They are balancing the demands of heavy capex against the realities of a cyclical market.
We have covered an enormous amount of ground today. We have mapped out a niche, debt-free, family-run manufacturer that has been hiding in plain sight. Aran Industries is attempting to capitalize on India's generational real estate boom by utilizing deep technological moats and a very smart backward integration into steel polishing, all while navigating the brutal realities of volatile steel prices, concentrated customer power, and macroeconomic cyclicality.
They serve as a perfect proxy for the broader industrial shift. It shows how the Make in India narrative and the strict formalization of domestic regulations are creating tangible, high-return opportunities for highly specialized component manufacturers who possess the operational discipline to execute their capacity expansions.
It fundamentally alters how you perceive the built environment around you. Which brings me to a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. The next time you step into a branded elevator in a sleek new commercial tower or a residential block, I want you to look past the polished logo on the button panel.
Yeah, look a bit closer.
Think about the fragmented, localized supply chains we mapped out today. Think about the invisible, mid-sized factories that actually bend the raw steel, polish the reflective mirrors, and painstakingly wired the automatic doors to open flawlessly. How much of the modern formalized world around you is actually built by unseen, highly specialized companies just like Aaron Industries?
It certainly makes the morning commute up to the office a lot more interesting.
It absolutely does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the layers beneath the surface of everyday life, and we will see you next time.